Now, once you have installed MySQL Server and other items in your macOS, now let us try to open MySQL using terminal. So we'll be using MySQL command line. For that, let me just open my Spotlight by pressing command and spacebar. I'll type in terminal here. Let my terminal open up. I'll maximize this. I'll increase the font size so that you can see. As you can see right now, I am in the terminal and I am not accessing my MySQL command line. To access the MySQL command line, what command you need to enter is MYSQL -u root -p and press enter. It will ask for your password which you had set up at the time of installation of MySQL. Now enter your password, and here you can see that you have entered into MySQL command line. Now the first command which we will use in the case of MySQL is we'll create a database. For creating a database, the syntax is create database, and then we need to type in the database name. So let us create a database, say db1, and each line, each command in MySQL ends by a semicolon. So this is mandatory, guys. We need to put in at the end. And there is no error. Our database has been created, which is db1. Now, how to check that, whether it is created or not? So we will type in the command show databases. It is in plural, bases. Let's see what all databases are there as of now. So you can see db1 has been created. Now, since we want to use this db1, this database, we will type in the command use db1. And now, whatever work we are going to do next is happening under db1 database. For example, we'll be creating tables here. So let's start with creating the first table in our db1 database. So we'll type in create table 1. So the syntax is create table, and then you need to type in the name of the table. So we have created table 1 here. But if I press enter here, I'll get an error. Why I'll get an error? Because I need to define the columns here along with table 1. So what I'll do, I'll open the bracket, the parenthesis, and let me create a table for employee details. So my first column is employee ID, and I need to enter the type of whether it is an integer, whether it is character, whether it is a float. I need to enter the data type. So I am entering employee ID as integer data type. Next, I'll enter the employee name, which will be a varchar, say 10, and I need to put in a comma here, not semicolon. Let me correct that. And let's say we have salaries also, and they are also integers. And let's create a first table. So our first table has been created. Let us see what all details we have put into it. So we would use the command desc, which is for describe, and describe table 1. So you see that we have created 3 fields. Fields are also known as columns. So we have created 3 columns, which are employee ID, employee name, and employee salary. The data type which they can capture are integer, variable character 10, and integer. And we will come to this topic primarily in our discussion today, which is the key. Key is basically primary key. Now, let's try to create an entry. Let's try to feed in some data into this table. So we will type in as the command is insert into. So this is the command table 1. We are inserting the data into table 1. So that's table 1. And we are entering the values. So the syntax is values. And we'll open our parenthesis. And let's enter the data. So say the first employee has an employee ID 101. And the name is say Anuj. and salary is say, 1 lakh rupees, and we'll enter the semicolon. Now, to see whether this uh, data has been captured into a table or not, we will use a command called select, and we will select star from table 1. So this shows that our data has been captured very well into a table 1. Now let's enter some more records. Record means rows into our table 1. So insert into table 1 values and say 102 Radha, and the salary is 10,000. And let's see our table again. And we can very well see that both the records have been updated. Now, since I was talking to you about a parameter here, which is key, this key is very important. We can set a unique constraint for one of the columns. So let's try to set up a constraint that the employee ID should be a unique value. So let's add it as a primary key. That's why the column key you saw above. Now, if I want to make set employee ID, EMP ID as the primary key, I have three options. Option number one, I could have done that at the time of creating a table. So, for example, if I create a new table, say table 2, and my ID is integer, and I clearly mention here primary key. Let me just quickly enter other details. So our table has been created. Now let us see the difference between both the tables. First, let me just pull out table 2, which we have just created. So the description is here in front of us, and let me just describe the previous table as well. Now, if you see the difference, we have kept everything same in both the tables. However, in table 2, we had added primary key. At the time when we were creating the table, we had mentioned EMP ID space INT space primary key, and you can see here that this cannot have a null value. Null value is that this cannot be empty, and it has a PRI written here, which stands for primary key. So EMP ID is field, that is the column, is now a primary key column. Now, if in case I want to, let's go to the option 2. If I have to set up a primary key in table 1 when I have already entered some records into it. That means I have already entered some data. I have fed some data into this table. Now, how can I set up a primary key? For that, let us first see the data of table 1. So the command is select. So as of now, we have just two records in it. Let's create one more record into this so that you may get a clearer picture. So we have added one more record into table 1. Now what has happened? Since employee ID EMP ID, the column, or any of the columns in table 1, none of them had a primary key attached with it. So that's why it allowed us to capture another data set, another value, which has a similar unique ID, employee ID. So if you see the output here, Anuj also has the employee ID 101 and Jay also has the employee ID 101. However, in an organization, we know that two employees cannot have the same employee ID. So this is actually wrong. This data needs to be cleaned. So at the first step, we could have entered employee ID as a primary key. But now, since we did not do that, we have to modify this. So let us first update this record. Let us change the employee ID. Either we can change this or we can delete this. So let's first drop this. Let's first delete this. So the command is delete from table 1 EMPID, where EMPID is equal to 101 and EMP name is equal to J. Or we could have just entered the EMP name is equal to J. So let's see what's our output like. Okay, so I have entered a wrong command. Let me just correct this. So it's deleted. Now let's set up the primary key for this table. How to do that? We will use the alter command. Alter table 1, add. So we are adding a primary key here. So we'll add primary key and we mention the column ID where we want the primary key to be set up. Now let us describe this table again, and you will see that now EMPID has a unique primary key attached to it. Now if we want to insert a record with employee ID 101, we won't be able to do that. Let us see how does that happen. So we are entering data for our third row, and we see that it says duplicate entry 101 for key is not allowed. So it's an error. So what do we need to do? We need to change the employer ID. Let's check out our table. So it's done. That's it, guys. Thank you so much.